Hey everyone, this is from Group 6, and here we will be presenting to you our PBL1 about the extreme causes and effects of deforestation in Indonesia. So, our group consists of myself, Pasha, then there is Shannon, Naufal, and Rehan. So, here's the overview or outline what we'll be discussing from the background of deforestation to the causes and effects in Indonesia, as well as the main effects such as the watershed, water crisis, and also for the mega diversity in Indonesia. Then we will end it with conclusion and suggestion tackle the issue. So first of all, is deforestation. So it's basically the permanent removal of standing trees. Moreover, it's the great clearing and removal of trees, plants, either through deliberate, natural, or accidental means. And it can occur in any area either dense by trees, plants, or wildlife. So just quick history. So actually, this deforestation has been happening since thousands of years ago, when humans were still like making fires and houses out of wood, and it it actually got also worse in the around 1800s, 1800s when in the industrial evolution era, when humans knew how to make sharp tools. But it just became a serious issue in the 1950s when the rainforests were cut down. And it got worse in the 1960s when Brazil began cutting down the rainforest. That's actually one of the biggest issue, one of the reasons why it just became a serious issue then, because rainforest is home to uh, one of the most diverse both plants and wildlife, or actually they cover about 10% of the wildlife and plants in the world. So why does it matter? So yes, you know, land covers 29% of the earth and forest covers the 1% of the land area. And it's because they have substantial benefits for and effects for us humans, wildlife, nature, uh, and then also for the water and also for the climate. So here we'll be discussing about the overall conditions of deforestation in Indonesia. This just showing to you the map of Indonesia back then. Used to be covered by so many green areas, which is the forest, which of course home to many biodiversity. But now, especially in the Sumatra and Kalimantan Island, it got cut down the most there. So, based on Embassy of Republic of Indonesia, Indonesia is an area, as you can see, of around 1.9 kilometers square, and the forest covers about half of its land area. And of course, those numbers are big and changing over time. And that big numbers also where the deforestation problem can come if we do not handle this issue well. So it's also just a quick overview. So all forests in Indonesia are under the Ministry of Environment and Forestry Law, and stated that on that law in Article 18, minimum of 30% must be of the land Indonesia's land area must be covered by forests. So in total, two of course, and they're legally used for production, conservation, protection forests, and convertible production forests. And it does need some sort of license to do some of those purposes. So here's the Indonesia's loss of forest cover since 1950 until 2016. It's span of 70 years until now. So uh, it shows that Indonesia has lost big hectares loss of its forest area, and actually right now Indonesia only has about 44% of its forest area of left in the land. And again, that's actually still above the 30% minimum requirement by the Ministry of Forestry and Environment. So here is the data of primary forest loss. So you can see actually from the previous graph, it showed that it's a great loss, right? This graph also shows that Indonesia is great loss, but this graph shows that in the 2015, unfortunately you can't really see here, in the 2015 until 2018, there was a reduction in the forest loss, massive reduction actually. So that actually shows that Indonesia is moving to the right direction in terms of to preserve its forest. And some factors contribute to that, such as governments or the the president to mandate law in 2016 about to strengthen the efforts to prevent forest fire and forest degradation, as well as to clear the peatlands. That also decreases the forest fire, of course, and decrease deforestation. Also, as the reduce in El Nino season, so that there is more rainy season than the hot season now. So just quick overview. So in total, even though it's been better for Indonesia, but now Indonesia has lost about 7 million hectares of land since 2002. And yeah, it still shows that Indonesia lost around, you can see 9.27 million hectares of tree, or that totals to about 4.97 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions. It still shows that there's hope for Indonesia, especially because our forest cover is above the minimum requirement, which is 30%, but we're 44%. So here are the main causes and effects of deforestation in Indonesia. So we need to go all the way back to where it all started. So it all started in the late 1960s when General Suharto assumed authority. One of his first moves was to develop a national logging industry, and him and his government published two laws. The first one in 1967, which was that stated 74% must be owned by government of forests in Indonesia. And the second later one, as you can see here on the screen, is the more concerning one, which is about concessions. And what's happened after that regarding concession is that there started to be a huge forest industry and boom of timber industry in Indonesia. And by around 1970s, around 81 concessions with private investors were agreed. And due to that, actually there are also high-ranking Indonesian generals in the military as well as in the government that had shares to that concessions. And actually, when you look at the paper, it does sound like a good deal. So especially in terms of for the economic sector, so because it did bring so many investors to Indonesia, but the problem was actually the proximity between the government who granted concessions and the cronies such as the private sectors, because that leads to an abysmal lack of transparencies. And yeah, it's because at the end of the day, as you can see, because of that transparency, which leads to overexploitation, because of the greeds of the cronies to just, get as much money, but then they just degrade the forest in Indonesia. So this graph shows explanation of three variables: deforestation, palm oil process, and corruption in Indonesia. So you can see all the variables are trending upwards, and when the palm oil prices goes up, the CPI or the corruption price index also goes up, while the deforestation doesn't go up that as high that much, because remember that minimum 30% requirements to preserve it of forest in Indonesia. And also in line with based on the World Watch, that palm oil is the most expensive crops to sell of all other crops, and also the least expensive, that has the least cost to operate and also to preserve in the oil business. And the other main cause is the result of the nature disaster. And this is also another consequence of Indonesia having that much big forest. Of course, we are blessed by it, but that also comes with the consequence that Indonesia is more prone to forest fire. And as you know, with natural disaster, it's an inevitable thing, such as the one happened 1982 to 1983. It was a very big El Nino season. There was almost no rain at all in the 1982, and finally only occurred in 1983, which resulted in a very big fire loss, which caused big forest degradation or deforestation. Also because Indonesia has massive peatlands, which is so prone to fire. So and yeah, Indonesia actually has about 22.5 million hectares of peatlands, and some people also want to do business with that pit lands, and they must clear the lands as well to do that business, which of course very prone to fire. And also people's intention to do palm paper business, in which needs the requirement of land clearing. And of course there are many effects of deforestation in Indonesia, but here the implications will be towards those that have the most substantial effects, such as for the people's life and activity, the water crisis, watershed, and biodiversity, in which will be explained more detail shortly.
Thank you so much for your explanation about your material before, and I think I will take it now from here. Okay, so hey guys, my name is Naufal, and I'm gonna continue the presentation with my material, which is about water crisis. So in this particular material, I will be discuss about 5 things. The first one is the definition of water crisis, and the types of water crisis. What are they? And spoiler alert, there are 2 types. And then we're gonna talk about the challenges also, the challenges in managing water crisis. And then the fourth one is we're gonna discuss about the water crisis in Indonesia, and in this part we will gonna talk about how Indonesian people responds to it, and also the last one is the solution for water crisis in general. So I think before without further waiting, let's go to the first part. Okay, so the first part is about the definition, like I said before. So before we talk deeper about water crisis, we should know first what is water crisis itself. So I think let's start from the definition of water. Okay, maybe you guys know about what is water, so I think I don't have to explain it. But what is crisis? So crisis, according to dictionary, is a time of intense difficulties, trouble, or danger. Or on simplified word, crisis is a time of difficulties. For example, economic crisis, which is the time where economy is in jeopardy, and or food crisis, where food is scarce and people will fight for it. Like it's the difficult time for people to find foods, therefore it called as food crisis. And so water crisis is a time where water is scarce and cannot meet the demand for water in a particular area. And for some fact, water crisis is also listed in 2019 by the World Economic Forum as one of the largest risks in terms of potential impact over the next decade. So yeah, water crisis is such a famous issue, and it's still happening until now in different region in the world. Okay, so now we'll move on to the next slide, which is the types of water crisis. There are 2 types, like I said before. The first one is physical crisis, and the next one is economical crisis. So let's start from the physical crisis itself. So physical scarcity occurs when there is not enough water to meet all demand. So in physical crisis, a country not have to be poor, but a country usually they are in like an area where water is scarce. So people can afford water, but since there are no water in the area, then there will be a crisis. So there are some symptoms. The first one is environmental degradation, decline in groundwater, and also water allocations that favor some group over the others, which means that if I can give an example, there are 2 groups, so Group A and Group B. Group A conquers the area where water is abundant, while the Group B doesn't. If Group A can share its water to Group B, then the Group B will not gonna experience water crisis. But if A decide not to share it, B will experience water crisis. So that means water allocations favor some groups over the others, can cause physical crisis. The next one is economical crisis. So economical crisis is water becomes scarce because there are lack of infrastructure, and therefore people cannot afford to use an adequate source of water. So it's not actually have to in Africa, because like in Indonesia itself, we have, I don't know, Nusa Tenggara or Papua. You know, the aqua advertisement, which sumber air Sudekat. Yeah, I think it's in Papua. So yeah, in Papua, it's a rainforest area, and I think there should be enough water sources. But since there are no infrastructure to support it, people still struggle to get water. Like some people still walk for miles, or they even go to the mountain to get the water. That is caused because there are lack of investment in water infrastructure. I think the government should build the infrastructure for water in the area, so people don't have to walk for miles. The infrastructure can be pipes, pumps, and maybe dams. It depends on the condition. So now we look at the map. So the blue one, the country in the blue color, is the country that has little to no water scarcity. And the red one is the country who experience physical water scarcity. So if we take an analysis, we can see that most of country that experience physical water scarcity is desert countries such as Arabia, Australia in the New South Wales region, and maybe Mongolia. So these countries are not necessarily poor, especially Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is super rich, but since it's on the desert, the water is like very little, so therefore they experience physical water scarcity. And how do they manage it? They just filter seawater. And next one is economic water scarcity. So yeah, we look at the map. Those countries are most likely in Africa, because some of African countries is poor and cannot afford the infrastructure for water. Well, I do believe that the country in yellow region is have enough adequate source of water, but since the government cannot afford the infrastructure, then they experience the economic water scarcity. And here are some data that I took. 1.6 billion face economic water shortage, which in yellow area, and 1.2 billion live in areas of physical scarcity, which in the red area. Okay, so move on to the challenges. So there are two challenges, which is the change in weather and then the population growth. So the first one is because of global warming. Yeah, when global warming occurs, the earth tends to get warmer, and in some places it becomes hot. So when the area becomes hot, the probability of occurrence of water crisis become high, because it can result in dried well, dried sources, lake, and other water resource. So therefore, global warming can cause such event like water crisis. And then the population growth. If we can see at the graph, Earth population is always increasing. And the water withdrawal, which people takes water from the sources, is also increasing following the increasing of population. We know that water on Earth is, the amount of water on Earth is constant. So when people withdraw more, the water source is not added, like it's not getting increased or even decreased. So therefore, in 2025, half of the world's population will be living in a water-stressed area, because the water source cannot accommodate such many people, and therefore it will cause water crisis. And move on to the next slide is about water crisis in Indonesia. So in last year, which is 2019, Indonesia got long dry season to El Nino phenomenon in the region. So when El Nino happens, the region becomes warmer, and therefore it can cause water crisis. So long dry season dries up well groundwater and water sources in the region. And the three main regions that is affected by this occurrence is Java, Kalimantan, and Sumatra. and therefore it results in water crisis in those area. So as we can see in the graph is the farmer with his sheep and in his dried paddy field. So it is because no water enough for the paddy field, therefore the paddy field becomes dry. And this water crisis can cause to other many problems such as food crisis, because when there is not enough water, the paddy cannot grow and therefore the rice will drop. And the result of water crisis in the area, therefore there are lack of water for bath, cleaning, and latrine or MCK, mandi cuci kakus in Indonesia, and then also lack amount of drinking suitable water, because some people in Indonesia still use groundwater for its drinking sources. Some of them cannot afford like water gallon, so they search water from the groundwater. The next one is how Indonesian reacts to water crisis. So from Indonesian people itself, they tend to buy clean water from the PDAM, and it comes to problem also because the water is expensive, like 40,000 rupiah, and it also has salinity because the well is dried. It gives the water salinity, so the water is not completely was bland. It has some taste. And then they also take water from nearest mosque where water is available, but also they cannot take water too much because they have to share with other people. And then they also have to dig deeper the well from previous step. Like for example, the previous step is 7 meters and they have to dig more, like 9 meters to get water, and they cannot guarantee the water is there when they dig deeper. So yeah, it's quite a problem. And for the government measure is, for the short term, is they prepare a fleet of 5 trucks containing fresh clean water that commutes to village in the region, and they do it daily. So until the condition becomes better, the government prepared the fleet of 5 trucks containing fresh water. I think we can gonna move to the next slide. Okay, so in previous slide we know that there are types of water crisis, the challenges, and what happens in Indonesia. We know that it's such a problem. So now we come to the solution to water crisis. There are 4 solutions. The first one is conserve and value water. So when there is a water, you don't have to use it too much, because you have to know that in the future you may have experiencing some water crisis, so therefore you have to conserve it. The next one is protect and restore fresh water sources. Don't you put some rubbish in water sources such as river, lake, and maybe sea. So yeah, just protect the environment and the environment will give it to you. And then also the government should invest in water infrastructure, because like in Papua cases, they have abundance of water, but since the infrastructure is not enough, they cannot make a use of it. So yeah, invest in water infrastructure is important. And the last one is address global warming. Yeah, because global warming is quite a problem to the world, actually, not only Indonesia. Because of global warming, the temperature become high, and therefore it dries some groundwater, and it can cause water crisis. I think for water crisis that's all. For the next slide, I will give it to my friend Shannon. Thank you.
Hello guys, my name is Rehan Dahananto Aryadi, and right now I'm going to explain about Indonesia as a mega diversity country. First of all, why is Indonesia called and considered to be a mega diversity country? Because of the flora and fauna that can be found, and the diversity that can be found in Indonesia. And that is why Indonesia sits at the 5th top mega diversity country in the world. It is because unique species that can be found only in Indonesia, such as the bawean deer, the batu beach turtles, the bekantan monkeys, and many more that can be found only in Indonesia. And furthermore, uh, there are about 781 reptile species, 270 amphibian species, and 515 mammal species in Indonesia. And for the for the flora, uh, Indonesia is covered by 25,000 flowering plants, which 55% of them is being endangered, and it is because of the human effect, which causes them to be endangered. And to following to our next topic, here I talk about the modern diversity roles, uh, which could be integrated by biodiversity found in Indonesia. So first, we can go back by not only the flora and fauna of Indonesia that is rich, but also the cultural diversity in Indonesia, which is rich. Uh, we could There are about 370 different uh, different tribes and tradition we can found in Indonesia, and that is why Indonesia is ranked third, based on the cultural diversity, and there from there we can have local knowledge and tradition passed on by their ancestors. We can that can uh, give a product of pharmacy and economy and many more, which was in the slide before. And for in our conclusion, deforestation is an activity where trees or forests being cut down in massive scale for many purposes, such as clearing land for plants, build new city, etc. With massive activities such as deforestation, there will be some impact to the environment, especially to people life and activity, water crisis, water rush, biodiversity, and from there, in order to minimize the negative effect, the government should make policies where it can control the number of forests being cut and make sure whether it can give more positive or negative effect to the environment. And therefore, the government should do reboisation to compensate the damage caused by the deforestation. That is it for my part. Continue to the next presenter. Thank you.
My name is Shannon and I will be explaining about watershed. So first of all, we need to know what is watershed. Watershed defined by Linsley in 1990 as a river of drainage system that are drained by a stream or a connecting stream that all flow into an originating area, and this stream that all of these streams are discharged through a single outlet. Another definition defines watershed as an ecosystem, and in this ecosystem lives an element. And these elements, such as an organism or biophysical environment, as well as chemical elements, that not only they balance the material energy through inflow or outflow, but they also coexist truly the environment that can bring benefits. For example, uh, as watershed is takes part in the water cycle, so as the water cycle keeps cycling and brought out or throughout the water from the upstream, middle, and from the upstream, middle, and to downstream, they works together to bring these elements from the higher area to the down area and end it in the oceans. As you can see here in the diagram, it illustrates watershed. As you can see, it started from the upstream or hulu in Indonesia, and as the water goes through the topography and through the landscape of the area, it goes through the middle or tengah, and Along the way, it ended in the downstream or hillier. What is interesting about the upstream is that it's act as a conservation area, and whereas the downstream act as a utilization area. In addition, the watershed or uh, the upstream watershed has an important function such as it acts as a protection of water management functions, and therefore every activity or every function that it takes in the upstream will impact or will influence the downstreams, and it will in the form of changes in the fluctuation of the water or the transfer of the sediments and materials that is dissolved in the river or in the watershed in the throughout the flow system from the upstream, middle, and the downstream. Moving on to the case of watershed damage in Indonesia, there are a total of 17,000 watershed, and as many of 2,000 watershed are classified damaged and need to be restored, or which is an equivalent of 1,007 hectares land of area. And there are 12 priority watersheds such as Brantas, Solo, Serayu, Cimanuk, Citarum, Ciliwung, Asahan, Batanghari, Bilawalana, and Sadang. And this damage to the watershed is due to human activities. So it is proven or it is known from a news site that this damage is due to the land is used for community agriculture that is only seasonal and illegal, or it can causes deforestation and also climate change, as you know that deforestation can causes the land to be free or lacking of vegetation, and it causes damage to the water cycle and other sectors of the forest. And as this watershed is washed away, it needs it needs rehabilitations, and the problems result in greater potential for the hydrological disasters such as floods, landslides, and drought. So, what is the solution to watershed damage in Indonesia? As the government and the community must come together to overcome this problem, and they have to take several actions or solutions, such as they need to reconsider which trees that needs to be cut down, as not all the trees and vegetation are cut down illegally, because these trees and vegetation are vital to the environment. And secondly, they need to reconsider about the water reservoir, as they can conserve water every day, like take shorter showers, take shorter few leaks, and turn off water when it is not needed. And thirdly, the industry can also take part in this, such as they can um, um, take a prevention of hazardous materials and taking it to the hazardous waste center, as they cannot just throw away the waste material to the environments. And lastly is to do not litter the environments, as waste products is harmful to the environments, not presently but to the future of the generations. And they can also take these waste products to the place that has been provided in the environments or by the governments. Presentation, we must end deforestation, as it is our best chance to conserve wildlife and defend the rights of the forest communities. And we as a community, we as a government, and we as an industry need to take action, such as implementing zero deforestation policies to clean up the supply chains. That means that we as an industry need to take accountable of our suppliers, and in producing communities, like for example timber, beef, soy, palm oil, and other materials, in a way does not fuel deforestation and has a minimal impact in our climate. And secondly, we need to reduce our consumptions on using less stuff, using plastic, using other materials that is not eco-friendly to the environments. For example, we need to use eating sustainable food and materials that is promotes healthy livings and healthy environments. We can also recycle, reduce, and reuse the materials again, and also to educate the families about how to use materials wisely and how everyday actions can impact the forest around the world, and also demand the governments to have a healthiest or safest or ways for producing commodities in a way that to ensures the protection of the natures and also respect human rights, and also to we as a community need to avoid false solutions like biofuels, biomass, and carbon offsets that can rely on wishful, and we cannot rely on wishful thinking, and yet to practice this in the real life so that the release of the greenhouse gases emission can be reduced. Thank you. That's all from our presentations.